So another huge week for artificial intelligence with the release of GPT-5, the OpenAI OSS models, Claude 4.1, some Unreal World generation stuff from Google. I feel like I can't take a day off because if I stop being on the internet, I'm going to sort of not be able to recognize the world after I get back. So thankfully today I have the perfect person to talk about it. It's almost, yeah, a little bit of a hiccup there with the stream. I bet you everybody's trying to try out like GPT-5 or something right now. It's breaking the internet.
Whole
So
office
how's it
right
going
now.
with you, man?
All the tokens are going to GPT-5.
That's right. That's right. Everybody's really, I think, excited. I mean, I looked at the stream and I thought, okay, interesting, crushing all the benchmarks. I feel like I was expecting a little more. We had I think what's even to me a little bit maybe more relevant was the OSS models earlier on in the week, but we got a super performant model, some other minor changes like personalities, which I've been waiting for a while. It's already kind of propagating all over the internet. So I looked at VS Code. I was already able to get it at VS Code. I looked at Open Router and other places are already getting it. We're not going to have sort of the ability to play with it on chatgpt.com until probably a little bit later as it rolls out. So usually the pro users will get it first. The rest of the peons will get it like next week. Just wanted to know what you maybe thought about the sort of the announcements, the models, and what else went on just really the whole week.
Yeah, it's definitely been first, I'm very excited to be back here and chatting with you. We got very lucky with the timing of this. I think there's clearly
It's fate.
Exactly. And it's funny because you can now say this at any time because
Yeah.
every week there's some magical new technology. So I want to first start by saying I'm just super excited to first have the opportunity to build in this space, but also to be working alongside people that are innovating consistently and constantly, and just who are so focused on developing these truly cutting edge products and cutting edge pieces of technology. So yeah, whirlwind week. I'll start with the open source side. Open source is near and dear to me. The last session we spoke about was entirely the open source community in the data ecosystem. So seeing a model of the quality of the GPT OSS being put out there is pretty amazing. It really is a testament to the fact that OpenAI does want to enable this technology to be used globally. They didn't have to release a smaller version of this model, which they did. They didn't have to release something that could run on laptops, which they did. So I think it really is a testament to the fact that OpenAI is doing a truly phenomenal job at trying to bring AI to people where they are. So I'm just really excited to be able to build in this time. Now GPT-5 I think is interesting for a number of reasons. A 400K context window is massive. Even the architecture, it's not the model architecture. This is not a mixture of experts, but what they've released on the model card so far is there's 3 models that are actually back this. One is a router model that can route to either a faster model that does fast and smart thinking, and a reasoning model. So it's almost the set of models that are able to work, this real-time router here, that are able to work in tandem with one another. And it's interesting if you look at how organizations work, or even an ER as an example. There's a triage step, right? People will triage the high priority questions or the high priority patients in this case to the right places. There's people who then take over after that. So I think we're seeing what really looks like a mirroring of the human decision-making process, which I think is really exciting. That being said, there's a bunch of new features also. I got particularly excited by the regex stuff, where you can actually give it a context-free grammar, get information back in a structured output way, not just JSON anymore, a validatable, parsable way. So they really are pushing the bounds. And again, for folks like us who are startup founders building in the AI space, I cannot think of a more exciting time to be building a company.
You're making me feel a lot better about it. I was feeling a little down, but I think you're right. The router is probably kind of the true innovation, that now you have a model that you can talk to and it routes and basically answers the needs according to its understanding of your prompt. And I did like that it appeared to look at context, that it knows about you from memory. That was pretty interesting. So when somebody asked it a question, they showed that it was able to take into account like all their emails. And one of the things that I think GPT does better than anybody else is that memory infrastructure that's built into the chatbot that can access all your chats. Like, say that if you create a project and you do like a deep research on just that project, that becomes now part of the internal memory for all the chats that you have with sort of the individual channels. So that was pretty good. And I think you're right. Some of the programming features that we saw were also pretty interesting. That huge context window, that's something new for them. I mean, we're not talking like Google Gemini with like a 2 million, context window, but it's still a lot more. And that means that it can, hold a lot more information. And the other thing is, I'm not sure how we can sort of see this, but how good it was at interfaces. That's been one of my issues with like some of these models that you ask them to do something and it's technically super great, but it just doesn't make stuff that looks very good. If you ask like ChatGPT to build you a presentation, I have to always tell people, hey, it's like gonna look like you did it, but you didn't. You only had one font and one font size. You might ask it to do some visualizations. That was pretty cool. I saw like there was an example of an SVG, animated graphic that taught the Bernoulli concept. I thought that was pretty slick, and I think we're not really going to know what we have until we have the opportunity to go test it a lot more. But I do like what you said. I mean, one of the things that I love about you is just all the work that you've done on LinkedIn, helping people understand like the fundamental concepts. And I really love both of these courses. It's hands-on introduction to data engineering. You really dig deep into how things are built and what you can do with some of these models. And in this practical applications one, I love that you really broke down how to take a model and kind of expand it and fine tune it and train it and make it something that an individual need. One of the things that I'm super excited about, as you mentioned, was these OSS models, because I think people have been holding out, especially, with the current administration and the current state of matters. Government can't just use any model like out there. And so I think some of the, models that came from other countries, they may have been, because of different rules like HIPAA, they may have not been able to use those things. And now you've got a best of class OSS model that, to me, the greatest thing was how how sort of stingy it was about what it gave you access to do, because it's so effective at memory management. And even though it's like 120 billion parameter model, you saw in some of the specs that it's actually, different layers and active parameters per token, made it so that you could run it. I don't know if you've been running it, but I've been running it on my local machine, and this is amazing. It's actually, it's not taking over my machine while I'm trying to run it. I can run the smaller model, which has like this fantastic performance. What are your thoughts kind of on like the technical part of this OSS? And then, what you can use it for as a developer who's actively doing stuff?
Yeah. First, I definitely appreciate the kind words about the courses. Those courses are kind of funny because a lot of times people ask me like, why do you make LinkedIn learning courses, or why is education such a big part of how you spend time?
Mhm.
And it's funny, when I learn a lot of these topics, I will be the first person to say, look, coming out of a place like Palantir, a place like Citadel, I was really lucky and thankful to have huge amounts of experience working in the data ecosystem. So operationalizing, transforming, analyzing terabytes or petabytes of data, that was kind of my lifeblood. When AI came out in the contemporary sense and started becoming universally prevalent, I had to learn this technology, much like everyone else. And so I kind of started with primitives, just like I do in the data ecosystem. How do I break down a model into its requisite parts? How do I understand what tokenizers are? How do I understand what even a context window is? And so that course right at the top there is really like my journey to understanding this space, broken down by almost the exact curriculum that I went through myself, the same
Mhm.
Jupyter notebooks, even the Hugging Face model that I pulled for deconstruction, like all of that. Especially around like re-ranking, there's a lot of folks who are very interested in not just semantic search, but how do I combine BM25 or exact match searching in as well. I actually built this exact system in the MTA and other places as well. So definitely exciting that they're excited to hear this course is resonating. and it's
Mhm.
exploded in viewership. It's been like a month, and we're at almost like 4K from my
Mhm.
side, which is it's definitely the fastest growing class that I've had. Now, in
Yeah,
terms
and
of the open
honestly, I gotta say, Venu, I watched this course and everybody that's in our, area should be watching this. It's really a beautifully explained, and well thought out sort of course that I think when I was watching it, I felt exactly like what you said, that this is like how I would have learned all this stuff. And he's really going in a very kind of specific way in how he approaches like teaching this. So talk a little bit more about maybe like what you used here in terms of like models of, or kind of what else that you do to sort of, you know, incorporate things like RAG and other techniques.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the driving principles of this course was so kind of as a fun side project, I built the AI chatbot for the New York City MTA.
Mhm.
If you ever go on the Train Time app and look at the trains, Long Island Railroad, Metro North, there's a demo online. The chatbot that actually allows people to buy tickets, to look up elevator, escalator statuses, get their trip rerouted because of accessibility reasons. Of course, answer questions with RAG. All of that was built using the principles in this course. And so for me, it really just came down to what are the pieces of information that I need to communicate, and what are the free pieces of technology or open source pieces of technology that I can use. And kind of going to your question about the open source model, I only use open source technology in that class.
Mm.
Nothing, you don't have to sign up, you don't have to pay for an API. And the main driver for that is I really want this to be truly accessible for every single person who wants to learn this ecosystem. And so cost can be prohibitively expensive. I know people are spending hundreds or thousands, if not more, on technologies like Cursor. I mean, phenomenal offering. But again, my goal was really how do I get someone who's never worked in this space to understand how this works? Yeah, here's the chatbot. So yeah, the technologies here were Chroma. We used a lot of Hugging Face models, an open source embeddings model. And again, my whole goal was just to make this truly accessible. And kind of bringing back to your first question, this is what I truly appreciate about what OpenAI is doing here. Just the idea of removing the cost barrier, having a model you can deploy on your laptop and just work with. I mean, that's incredible. I don't have to spend a bunch of money on OpenAI's own product. I can just deploy this on hardware I already have and start playing around with it. That's where I think education really becomes important. And I think one thing underlying all of this, there's a feeling of, I know software engineers, myself included, there's a bit of unease, just thinking, what does this mean for my career? What does this mean for my ability to build? But I really have started thinking about this in a very different way more recently, where these are really co-pilots or really expert deployable agents that assist you more so than they are trying to come in and autonomously do people's jobs. When I started thinking about it that way, I realized the speed at which I could move, both as a developer and as a founder, the research that I could do, the democratization of information about am I paying the right amount for an accountant? How do I actually set up an integration to our HR system? All of that that used to take reading documents and everything else to understand has become super fast. And so it's really enabling, I think, this new generation of builders to move incredibly quickly as well.
So another thing that I loved about this demo that I'll make sure that I put the link in the notes was how good the model was at sort of things that models would get confused at. So can you talk about how you achieve that? Because I know you have an example here where a 70 something year old is asking questions and it recognizes a few things about what they're saying, so it routes them really smartly the right way so that they can get what they need to get going.
Yeah, so there were two pretty key innovations here. First, I'll start off with the underlying models themselves. A lot of people look at a 400K context window or a million token context window, and they're like, great, this can solve everything. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. There's a bunch of problems with populating your context window to the fullest degree. LLMs tend to forget what's in the middle of a context window. You can poison a context window. You can have two different contradictory facts in the context window, and it's unclear which one reality represents. So the context window is not all you need. I also use a technology named Rasa here, which was just a visual and YAML-based way of building these kinds of flows. And so I think what was really powerful, and I think what Rasa has pioneered and what the LLM world is now seeing, is this idea of a contractual slash visualization based approach to designing agentic workflows. I've always thought it was kind of funny. I see a lot of people who do text to agent workflows where they're saying, create this process for me and run it every single time. They're trying to use non-deterministic systems to create a repeatable process, like a deterministic process on a non-deterministic system. So it's almost like I want to run this thing every single time, but it's going to run on a non-deterministic system, which is the LLM, that may hallucinate, outputs may change, a bunch of things may go wrong. It's always kind of funny. So I always wondered, why don't we let code do what code does well, which is run the same thing over and over again in a deterministic way? And why don't we let the LLM do what the LLM does well, which is rephrase messages, write posting or write messages or write content, and really just marry the two. And so the primary way of achieving this was being very deliberate about what I wanted the LLM to be responsible for and what I wanted the core pieces of code to be responsible for, hitting APIs, parsing and validating date times, and everything else. That magical experience, I think, really does come down to a separation of concerns between what tool is best equipped to do what part of the process.
Super cool. So back up a little bit and talk about your journey, because I think it's really cool. You mentioned just barely about Palantir and Citadel. Those are two super well-respected institutions that everybody in coding and development would love to be a part of. So talk a little bit about your journey to where you are today.
Yeah, I think I was very lucky to have an opportunity to work at Palantir at the time that I did. At the time, Palantir had one primary offering, the Gotham platform. There was another one that eventually, blossomed in a different way. But I got a chance to really understand and conceptualize what user-centric development looked like. So Palantir has this concept of forward deployed engineers. I started off as a software engineer, became a forward deployed engineer, got a chance to embed with a lot of our customers, witnessing their workflows firsthand, and really developing this kind of deep intuition around the importance of solving a customer's problems first, and then building the platform in using that as a way of informing it. So it was just a very powerful way to start off my engineering career. I got a chance to work on a bunch of different platforms, a bunch of different customer teams, from the government space to the healthcare, commercial space. Ended up working on the compute platform at Palantir, which was just, again, really powerful at a time when technologies like Spark were really exploding. After that, I actually got a chance to work at a startup. It was a data as a service company named Veriset. They got acquired, which is amazing. But the goal there was really, how do I source huge amounts of data to enable anyone around the world to make data-driven decisions, whether it's Starbucks trying to pick a place to make a new store, whether it's someone trying to target a marketing campaign in a slightly better way, or whether it was, this is a real use case, at the time trying to track COVID around the world. From there, was able to join Citadel. I was head of business engineering, which really is just another way of saying people responsible for building commercially focused software. In the case of Citadel, commercially focused means portfolio manager focused. So rapidly building tools, products, and technologies to help portfolio managers make data-driven decisions quickly. Of course, spent a bunch of time advising companies. Databand got acquired by IBM, which was great. Harangi got acquired by Bitdefender, which was great. Most recently was head architect at Sync. Sync Computing was a Databricks optimization platform, merged with Capital One. So it's just been this heavy data-driven ecosystem. And especially now, what I'm most excited about is using all of these kind of foundational knowledge about how to make data-driven decision-making and using AI as a way of augmenting people through my new startup named Karu. So we were really lucky. We closed our seed round. One of our lead investors is one of the founders of OpenAI and the founder of Facebook AI. We have phenomenal angels, the CEO of MotherDuck, CEO of DBT, CTO of Outer Bounds on the cap table as well. And our goal really is, we want to really, as I said before, AI is so good at doing some of the grunt work that people don't necessarily want to do, or maybe aren't even best equipped to do, whereas people are these fundamentally creative entities. So how do I let people do what they do best, which is be creative, while letting AI do what it does best, which is data operationalization and analysis? And that's the vision of Karu.
Wow. So that's pretty exciting. Talk a little bit about maybe some suggestions that you would give to someone who's getting started. I mean, we hear a lot of horrible things today about, junior developers not being able to sort of penetrate into jobs. And but at the same time, we hear people who are super experienced, kind of like, you know, 10 number salaries. So what would you tell somebody today who's maybe thinking about software engineering, or they're maybe considering, I don't know, like plumbing or something, because they see the AI is kind of taking over?
I actually sit in a co-working space right now where there's a company that sells to HVAC and they're like crushing it.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's not a bad thought. I mean, yeah.
I will say this. I think there's a lot of doom and gloom floating around. And, naturally when uncertainty happens, there's people who are, scared of the uncertainty. And uncertainty is never a good thing for the vast majority of people. But it can be a very powerful motivator, as evidenced by the fact that, you mentioned the Bernoulli equation. I remember in school trying to understand and visualize what that meant. And what we had, I'm hopefully not that old, but what we had were these static textbooks, right? Unless I found an app online to help me visualize that principle, it was a very hard thing to conceptualize. Not only that, like even the basic mathematical equations or basic theorems that are pretty foundationally important. AI's ability to explain these complicated concepts in a way that is understandable to me, I actually think is really powerful. So for a lot of people that are very worried about the professional future or what this tool really is potentially has the impact of doing, I would really say if you could almost refine that focus to how can this tool equip you and help you be significantly more impactful at what you do, that's what I would say. And again, for developers who are graduating or people that are worried from a job perspective, I see people sitting around me that are able to, vibe code incredibly powerful applications in hours. I know people that have set up billing practices for their dad's dentist business, people that are helping actually, again, track COVID just all through a text-based interface. So the number of problems this technology is solving, I think, is incredibly powerful. That being said, I do think one thing we are seeing with these models, as someone who's not in the AI research space, maybe a passive observer, we are seeing their performance roughly converge. So you can imagine what the tail end of this may look like, and I could be totally wrong here, which is models that actually, they're trained on all of the corpus of publicly available information, and their performance largely converges. So maybe there is a ceiling to a lot of this stuff. And if there is, becoming familiar with how to use these tools as quickly as possible and as powerfully as possible is just a benefit.
Mm.
And so I know there's doom and gloom, but kind of wrapping this up, I think there's a very, very palpable and real reason to be very excited about this space. One small thing I'll share is OpenAI had a founders day, and we went and heard from GC, their chief commercial officer. He said something at the time that I thought was a little, I didn't believe it transparently. He said one of OpenAI's goals is potentially to have a one-person company that's able to make $1 billion. And wow. Sounds, fairly inconceivable. Now that I'm running my own company, I'm thinking about how much of the work I'm handing off to like an AI tool to do potentially our bookkeeping, or an AI tool to do research into our PEO. So you can imagine that world is not super far away. So everyone officially became able to be a startup founder, solve problems, and go from there.
That is true. But I always think that whenever things are changing rapidly, that's when new opportunities sort of arise. And you should just be ready for those. And as long as you're excited about what you're doing, if you love coding, I think, like you said, right now, the beginners are the vibe coders who can use these tools to create great things. There's obviously a lot of infrastructure that is lacking from any vibe coding project that needs to be there. But if I remember how I got started, it was just building things that solve problems for me. I didn't really care if anybody else used them. It was just useful to me. So as long as you have sort of that attitude of learning, we've seen a lot of investments from huge companies. You saw, the investment from Google. They pledged $1 billion. You saw, all kinds of investments happening right now. So I think that it's still a viable sort of career. It's just going to be at a different level, like programming the hello world. It's not going to be what gets you in there, but start with vibe coding. And I think that obviously I'm really glad that, Mark Zuckerberg has gone out with huge bags of cash, like hiring people. It made me feel a little bit better that people maybe are thinking that there is kind of a place for people that can understand the technology super well. So speaking of technology, we've seen like this strange evolution of models. We started out with simple LLMs, search grounding, agents, and now we have like this parallel agents, and perhaps this new thing that I wasn't thinking as much about until you reminded me, this routing that we see in GPT-5. How good are those technologies when it comes to implementing them? Because I think when you look at ChatGPT, there's a lot of tooling that happens when you're just using that product. When you're a developer, you actually have to kind of plug all those things together. So how do we make them better? How do we customize them and reduce hallucinations more and more so that we can make them more useful? I know you've got that Dash tool. So how do you work about doing something like hallucination prevention in those tools?
It's a great question. I do think so. One quick thought on the previous point. You asked me what can a lot of the folks do who are new in this space. I think you just made a very interesting point, which is start building in this space. I have a phenomenal co-founder, and at times I'm a skeptic, and he will actually say things like, "All right, Vinu, you got to go out there. You got to start using this tool and come back." His name is John. He's a phenomenal guy. And yeah, I used the tool and I was like, this is amazing. And this kind of kept happening over and over again. And it's not just amazing in terms of my ability to build, but also amazing in terms of just like my ability to understand what's going on in this ecosystem. So I strongly encourage people. I mean, again, not just take classes like the one I made, but to start building. Now, I think what's really interesting is if you look at to the second question, all of the new technologies that have come out, we have a lot of technology around tooling. We have a lot of technology around validation, JSON output validation. We have MCPs. We have this kind of suite of agentic workflows. What I've really realized is kind of an axiom that Palantir's CTO said many, many, many years ago, which is, again, Palantir's goal was never to just have a magical button that we would joke about this internally. There was never a find terrorist button in Palantir, as long as people, as much as people wanted that as a piece of functionality. What Palantir was really good at doing was augmenting the human with technology, whether that was analytical technology, whether it was visualization technology, whether it was even just kind of like drill down technology. So I really think what we're seeing now is we're seeing the need for humans to be able to visualize the core performance of what their models are doing in terms of what's happening in what order. How does a deep research process actually look? How do I intercept that process, give new information, and continue it forward? Now, I mean, this is exactly what Karu is building. We are building this visual research and decision platform that allows people to do exactly these kinds of things. Augment deep research with proprietary information. Ensure that they can actually visually see a graph that represents the execution hierarchy of what's happening where and when. We've already seen huge amounts of results with this. Just people who go from a text-only interface to being able to visualize the set of steps that are happening and in what order. And I think that's what we're really missing. And taking one big step back, why my belief, and I think Andre said this as well in the last LLM summit, Cursor is a phenomenal tool, largely because you have your IDE on the left-hand side and you have your LLM on the right-hand side. You as a human can interact with the IDE where you need to and the LLM where you need to. So that modality has been proven to be very powerful. We're seeing companies like Clay repeat that, where they've developed go-to-market engineers. But what does that actually look like for people that are making data-driven decision-making? So that modality, that IDE for using these tools and these technologies becomes really important. And this is actually where I think Palantir engineers, people who have had to build platforms, are uniquely suited to tackle these problems. Because what we've had to do forever is build tooling that augmented humans in this exact way.
Yeah, so you were talking to me before about how humans have this capability of understanding information, and it's very different than what LLMs and other tools can do, which is really just take and process like textual data. They can't see the big picture. So I know that you shared with me, perhaps it's this tool that you or this infrastructure that you were working on for making that happening. We've seen kind of, I don't know if I would say similar tools, but we've seen sort of some of the visual interfaces like an N8N and other tools that try to sort of visualize the flow be really interesting. But you're really thinking about beyond, beyond sort of a technical tool to build things, but it's a tool that's perhaps more available to other people in the financial world, simulation, and that can actually take data from geopolitical sentiment and implement that into the platform, right?
Yeah, so I think it's a really great question. What technologies like N8N and LangChain are really good at doing is they provide an interface for the human to try and get the LLM to do what they want to do. It's almost a workflow creation tool. First do this, then do this, then do this. It's kind of why in the beginning I was mentioning it's a little interesting to try and do that when the LLM itself can inherently like hallucinate and cause issues. So if you're going to build a set of deterministic steps that should happen in order, I think those tools are great, but I would also say you can also write like a bunch of if statements. You can write an Airflow DAG. You can write a whole bunch of mechanisms for tasks that have to happen deterministically in order. What our tool is doing is we want the human to be creative and we want the LLM to be creative. So that visualization that you saw, it's not any code that a human wrote. The LLM had made a determination on how to perform a research task. And as it made that planning process, it figured out what pieces of information to pull in and built that graph visually. So this, yeah, again, this is not anything that a human wrote. This is an LLM's research process being visualized. And that's where I think the differentiation really does happen. As a human, I can see now, okay, this is how the LLM thought through the problem. But let's say, for example, I know it says Bloomberg in here. Let's say I don't have access to Bloomberg. I'm not a big hedge fund person, but I have access to cheaper tooling or like FactSet or something else. The LLM should be able to process information in full knowledge of the tooling that I uniquely have access to and plan patterns of execution around that. And that's what we're really enabling here. So this is not a workflow builder tool. And there's a lot of companies doing a phenomenal job at that. This is really a tool almost for debugging an LLM's thought process. And I think this is why the traction that we've gotten has been largely around decision makers in critical environments who have a detailed question around, should Apple move manufacturing from China to India? What are all the geopolitical ramifications of doing that? Which is inherently not a process that you can like write in code. It's a process that involves a lot of research, a lot of twists and turns based on what we're seeing out there. And that's really where I think our sweet spot is. So let the LLMs be creative, let them do what they need to do, still using technology, still using agents that live in a serverless ecosystem, but give the human that ability to let the LLMs be creative on Rails.
So basically, the output is not like a website or an SVG. It's basically, the infrastructure for how this works. What would you do with something like this as a next step? Like you see this visually and you go, I see what the relationships are. So what will you do, as a decision maker to use this information?
It's a great question. The first and foremost thing that I hear is people who want to eliminate hallucinations. That statement actually doesn't make much sense because an LLM is inherently a probabilistic machine. It's not hallucinating. It's a weird word people gave it, but it's doing exactly what it should be doing. It's operating in a probabilistic way. And so for me, the next steps here are really, how do I understand the assumptions that went into my LLM producing the information that it did? How do I tweak those assumptions and rerun scenarios? Right now, you give deep research a query, it disappears for 20 to 30 minutes and comes back, and you have this artifact. Again, it's a phenomenal tool, but the same problems that I mentioned with the context window compound. There's a ton of information that gets shoved in. How do I actually know where information came from? How do I separate information that requires a coding agent to do computation versus a web scraping agent versus a research agent versus even an auditability tool? And so the set of steps here is actually fairly concrete, where we're almost building a scenario planning / wargaming platform, where if I have to make a decision, I have access to all of the data and all of the tools that I need, and I can guide the LLM along the process and have this persistent artifact such that at any time in the future, if I want to revisit what the outcome of that decision was, why I made the assumptions that I made, and how I may be able to change this moving forward, I now have an artifact that shows exactly how that decision process was made. This is actually very similar to what the Brookings Institute and other think tanks do. They produce these, even consulting firms, they produce these series of steps to describe why a decision was made. And in our case, it's just interactive. So we can not only execute new types of research from here, but we can actually start figuring out, how do I change assumptions and rerun portions of that tree? Or most importantly, how do I run a ton of these simulations and potentially generate even new ideas for research investments, for wargaming exercises, or even financial services advisory?
Yeah, so you did mention something that was interesting when you were talking to me about this, about it having the capacity of understanding geopolitical issues. So that is an extremely complex sort of issue that most tools would not even be able to consider. So, how exactly do you get to when you're talking about countries and their sort of evolving issues in real time? How is it able to take into account those kind of things when making decisions?
It's a great question. And a lot of people, I mean, a lot of other platforms I've seen just throw it to an LLM and say like, "Oh, figure it out." um, Again, what I look to here and what like my co-founder and I look to is really how do humans do this? And you realize there's a ton of very interesting frameworks out there. We were given a book about OS intelligence frameworks for how decisions are actually made in a structured way. There's frameworks like the IMF framework for actual geopolitical risk evaluation. There's core structured decision-making methodologies that people follow. The simplest one of this is the scientific method. Anytime, why do we have the scientific method, or why are checklists such an important thing? Largely because by giving humans a set of steps to follow, it drastically increases and improves the chances of that human performing the task correctly. And so when we're actually designing any of these, we're not just saying LLM go loose. We have very clear frameworks that we use that are not just inspired, but that are almost exactly the frameworks that are being used in the industry right now to evaluate decisions. I'll give you a very simple example. I spent a lot of time as an EMT, which is kind of a fun side thing that I do. But EMTs, when they arrive on site, have a very specific and very clear checklist. Starting at the top, BSI, scene safety. BSI stands for body substance isolation. Am I wearing gloves? Am I protecting myself? Then, is the scene safe? Then, what's my general impression? You can keep going to, again, acronyms people know, ABC, airway, breathing, circulation, DCAP, BTLS. And all of these acronyms, what they really do is they're ways of remembering and structuring thinking. And so the way we run any of these analytics is we incorporate that clear, concrete, structured methodology as an inspiration, or even as an execution standard for these kinds of processes. In OpenAI's case, they have a router that's deciding the best model for the particular user's query. Is it a deep research model? Is it routing to a more simple model? In our case, we're also deciding the goal of this query that goes in. What is the best set of frameworks for us to use? How do we create these agentic loops that follow those frameworks, fill in information, and go from there? So this is, again, the core behind this is informed by decades and decades and decades of industry research into how people make decisions and how organizations make decisions. All we're doing is saying, rather than this poor consultant who has to read 700 pages of information today, let the LLM do that. Let it summarize the most key and important points. Let it decide and link back to what it learned from those earnings reports or those summarizations, and let humans go from there.
So you also talked about how this can be used in the armed services to like help make decisions in the field. Now we're talking not about dollars, but about lives. Like, how does this take those very sort of difficult issues into account?
It's a great question. And I think the core of this is, again, we create a structured way, and exactly like exists in most software environments, right? We create a structured way of approaching decision making.
Mm.
In most software engineering ecosystems, there's an architecture review. If I'm going to go out there and make a massive decision, I will have a bunch of people decide and debate whether or not to set up the architecture in method A, method B, method C, method D. If I'm going to treat a patient, I have doctors in a room who actually decide and discuss what's the best way to go about treating this thing. This is why differential diagnoses occur the way that they do. And so again, our goal is not, this is not some magical autonomous system. Anyone who sits here and sells you a magical autonomous system, I think, is not going about things the right way. It is a system that augments humans in exactly the way that's necessary, keeping them close to structured decision-making frameworks. The goal is not, again, to just empower AI to go do a bunch of crazy stuff without any human oversight. There's a set of steps and a set of checklists that do need to be followed. And when we have that, we can actually use AI again to do the grunt work and let humans be creative. But underlying all of this, I want to take one step back. The core of this is really to enhance a human's creativity. Cursor generates code that humans ask for. So a human can say, create this, write-ahead log system. Cursor will go out there and start writing that code. Cursor is not deciding that you need a write-ahead log system most of the time. It is saying, okay, you've asked for something. Let me go out there and actually do this for you. Run that simulation, write that code, see if it compiles or not. If it doesn't compile, I'll try to fix it. If I'm unable to fix it, I'll revert back to the user and say, I can't implement this for XYZ reason.
so far we've seen basically tools that are trying to solve simpler problems than something like this. This appears to be sort of an evolution of what else you can do with these tools. Can you actually use them to do predictions and organize and do better research in a way? And by letting the tool, I'm pretty impressed with that. It's building out this kind of infrastructure from the chat. So I wanted to talk to you about something else that kind of dropped recently. It's a little bit different, but I think it kind of relates into that the computers are trying to solve all these different problems that we maybe maybe didn't think were problems. So we got this really cool tool from Google called Genie 3, which is a general purpose world model. I mean, I know that when I'm trying to do sometimes things with ChatGPT, the most difficult thing is to try to get it to understand the real world. I was trying to get it to do a simple sort of description of 3-point lighting for a presentation that I was doing, and it just could not understand the three-dimensional relationship between those lights. It just could not put the front light and the back light like in the right place. It kept on screwing it up because it didn't seem to have world knowledge. So how would perhaps a tool like this give you some additional data that is more accurate and maybe lead to other things where some of these maybe decision engines can be placed into something like robotics?
I think it's a great question. I think what's very interesting about this is it's become clear that the limiting aspect of any kind of these models' performance or improvement is a combination of data accessibility and reinforcement learning. I think with the idea of data accessibility, the access to, I don't know how much open source data is available that help do 3D lighting in different places. I think that is a limiting factor. But I do think with technologies like reinforcement learning, you're going to be in a better position, or we will be in a better position to improve these models given whatever task that we really want to have. What I think is powerful about us and about what this offering really is again, we want to see how people are fixing decision making live. That's a hugely powerful tool and hugely powerful opportunity. Where again, a lot of times there's actually almost a binary outcome to a lot of what ChatGPT will result in. You will run a conversation or run a deep research process, and there actually usually is a binary outcome. I'll either take decision based off of the output, or I will not take decision based off of the output because I've hallucinated, I don't understand what happened. And it's almost like I spent all this money on all these tokens. I didn't do anything because it messed up, 1/3 through the process. I think our goal here, I think I should say our goal here is really to make every bit of research, every bit of work done actionable in some way.
Mm.
And so even here, as I don't know how you integrated with the model as it was trying to figure out the 3D or the 3D lighting side of it, but I wonder how much feedback was given and how if that feedback was captured, if at all, to actually improve the performance of that model. And that's, again, our focus is actually not in the 3D human space, just maybe for now, but that's really what we're trying to do. We already know that there's complicated, detailed methodologies for performing objective decision making or objective reinforcement learning. If I say what's 3 + 7 and it gives me an answer other than 10, I know that's objectively wrong. What about that subjective side of it? And what about that help the model actually think along the way side of it? That's really what we're thinking a lot about.
Mm.
And I think what's really powerful is, again, capturing all this information helps us improve these models, but it also helps us accelerate the rate at which the work that humans probably shouldn't or maybe aren't best suited to do, sitting in a chair for 10 hours a day, 15 hours a day, reading, can actually be handed off.
Mm. Yeah, I'm really excited about what this could bring for things like simulations and just as another more, I don't know, a data point that has better information about how things work in the real space. So thank you so much. Just want to give you an opportunity to sort of close up with any additional thoughts that you have or anything that you're working on. I think everybody should go check out your courses, but I'm sure you've got a lot of other new things happening.
Now, I just want to say thank you again for having me. I'm really excited because I think, again, this is an incredibly powerful time to be building. I know there's a lot of fear out there. Transparently, I have some of the fear as well. But our ability now is becoming less and less limited by the time that we have in a day, and rather the creativity that we bring to the problem-solving process. And so the more creative we can be, the more we can let these models and these tools do what they do best, which is design these environments, write this code, perform this work for us, the more we can do what humans were really set out to do, which is be creative in our own right, problem solve in our own right. And again, the way we all start is, I think I'm really happy with the course's performance. I think I've gotten probably like 30 or 40 different people who've reached out to me saying how much they love the course. 2 people have gotten jobs exclusively off of the content in that course. And so I'm just really happy it's resonating. So I would say check out that course. If you're interested in Karu or what we're doing as an offering, or would love to be part of the team, we're definitely in a good spot to hire and expand the team. So yeah, just I'm really excited to be building, excited to have a chance to talk to you again, Ray. And the next time we chat, maybe we'll be on, GPT-7.
It'll be like a virtual environment. I mean, I like your background, but maybe we can work in a real meeting next time. Thank you so much, Vinu. I'll
Thanks,
talk to you soon.
talk to you soon.
All right, bye-bye.